This is a very basic sourdough recipe designed in the video to make 2 loaves, but this recipe can be scaled to make 1 regular size loaf with the ingredients shown here. It requires a ripe starter, fed the night before. Initially incorporate the salt and the flour, give it a good mix. Take your ripe starter, add in the water, be exact with measurements. A little extra will cause a very sticky, difficult to work with dough. Give it a good whisk so the starter and the water are fully mixed, and then gradually add the starter a little at a time to the flour. Give it a good mix and then continue to add, so you're bringing all of the liquid into the flour mix. Initially using a wooden spoon or a spatula, really make sure you get all of the starter and water out of the bowl. Clean off the spatula. The mix at this point will be very stiff, very shaggy, i.e. tears. At this point, get in with your hands and really give it a good squidge, technical term. And the idea is really to incorporate any of those lumps of dry flour into the mixture. You're starting the process of creating some gluten at this point, but this is not the main point of the mix. Here is just to get all of the water, the liquid and the flour incorporated. Clean down the sides of the bowl so you don't end up with little hard lumps of dried flour and water in the mix. Get ready for some comedy Pinky and Perky voice.
Alexa, 40-minute timer.
Here we're now going to cover the dough and leave for 30 to 40 minutes. That really allows the moisture to fully hydrate the flour. So next, rather than kneading the bread to create the gluten, we're going to use a stretch and fold method. We'll do this over the course of 2.5 hours. Each stretch and fold set is 4 pulls and a fold down, turning the bowl through 90 degrees. And then after those 4 stretch and folds, we leave the dough to rest for 30 minutes and do the same again. So each set is 30 minutes apart, and a set is basically 4 pull and folds of the dough. Very measurable, very repeatable, and actually not too much effort. It's more about the time to leave the dough to rest. So here's the second set. Take a handful of dough, lift, stretch, fold down, turn the bowl, stretch, fold down, turn the bowl, and again, and finally again. Lid on, 30 minutes timer, and then we'll come back to it for the 3rd, 4th and finally the 5th set of stretch and folds. Each time we do this, the dough starts to become a little bit more smooth, a little bit more extensible, i.e. stretchy. So you'll see now it's starting to stretch. The dough is becoming much more, as you would expect, like a nice ball of soft, smooth dough. This particular flour is a seeded granary, so there will be lumps in this particular one. A strong white flour will give you a very smooth dough. And here on the fourth set, the dough now is starting to tighten up, so I can't even leave it in the bowl anymore. I'll just take it out and stretch it between my hands. Same principle, pull, fold, turn, and back in the bowl to rest.
Alexa, 30-minute timer.
And for this flour and most regular bread flours, 5 sets of stretch and fold will be enough to develop the right amount of gluten for the bread that we're aiming to achieve here. You see the dough is very tight now, quite difficult to stretch, and that's about as far as you want to take the gluten, otherwise it will become too tight and will be a very close crumb. The soft centre of the bread won't aerate very well because it will be too tight. A great way to check the correct level of gluten is the window pane test. So you pull a little bit of the dough between your hands and stretch it gently, and you should see a translucent window. So this is the window pane test. And once you're comfortable with the level of gluten, now it's the bulk ferment. So the whole of the dough just sits on the countertop for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, and it really does depend on the ambient temperatures, the strength of the starter. There's a lot of variables here, so recipes generally tell you a time scale, but the truth is it's a case of knowing the feel for the dough. And throughout a sourdough recipe process, it's all about the feel for the dough. So after 4 or 5 hours you would start to test the dough to make sure it's ready, and in that time you can prepare your proving trays. In this case I'm using 2 bannetons. So after 4 or 5 hours, the dough it won't have doubled, but it'll certainly be much more aerated. You can see here the volume's increased significantly. It'll feel quite wobbly, and this is something that you'll get to know over time in baking. But in this case, you're looking for at least a half again size increase, not quite double, but somewhere between half and a double. So here I'm shaping very gently. I'm not knocking out all the air like you would a regular yeasted bread. Gradually shaping the dough, stretching it out, rolling it up, well floured surface, and here I'm creating surface tension. So I'm dragging the dough toward me to stretch, so it catches on the front edge of the dough and stretches the surface of the dough. So here we go again, plenty of flour. Lay out the dough, gradually just pull it out, fold it up on itself. Don't try and trap too much air in there, just allow it to fold in. Tucking the edges under with my dough scraper, and again just pushing the dough forward so the front edge catches, and that creates surface tension. Plenty of flour, otherwise it will be sticking to the proving tray. Pop any surface bubbles if there are any, and then invert and drop into the proving tray. I'm going to stitch now, so it's just pulling the base of the loaf, remember it's upside down, just again to create some tension. Plenty of flour, and we'll do the same again. If you don't have these cane bannetons, you can use a tea towel in a bowl or a colander, really well floured tea towel so you don't get the dough sticking. Again, stitching the underside of the loaf. You can see it's quite aerated, it's quite inflated, the loaf. I haven't knocked too much air out of it. Cover the dough, plastic bag, a shower cap, something like that to stop it drying out, and leave for 4 or 5 hours. It depends on room temperatures, but you test the dough by prodding with the finger. If it springs back part way but leaves an indent, it's ready. If it doesn't spring back at all and deflates, it's overproved. If it springs fully back, it needs a little bit more time, and it's about the feel for the dough. Here you can see nicely aerated, the indents stay in there. This is ready for baking. So I've preheated my Dutch oven. My oven it's an Argus, so it's always on. It's red hot, 240 degrees in my case, anywhere between 220 to 240. I tip the first loaf out, score it deep, almost horizontally, all the way around one edge. I spray with a little bit of water This keeps the surface moist, so its initial growth in the oven is with a damp surface, so it's moist and doesn't crust up too quickly. In it goes. So I'm cooking in a Dutch oven to trap the steam, again to keep the surface moist, and we'll do about 20 minutes. So 20 minutes on the first covered part of the bake. And this is always the heart-stopping moment. Will it rise? Will it spring in the oven? Yes, it did. So there's the slice, the score in the dough that's opened up to produce that ear and the stretch. Now it goes back into the oven for another 20-25 minutes to complete the cooking. Here's the second smaller bowl. Again, sliced part way down. That allows the spring, the expansion of the loaf, without tearing the crust in random places. So the first loaf's in the bottom oven, the second loaf now goes into the top oven, again 240, 20 minutes there or thereabouts. And that one's risen nicely as well. So we don't want any more steam, hence it's going straight back into the oven uncovered. That'll allow the heat to crust up the surface of the dough. So both are now in the top oven. Another 20-25 minutes. I always use an oven thermometer to check the internal temperature of the loaf to ensure it's cooked. You're aiming for about 98 degrees centigrade. Allow the loaf to fully cool as it still cooks. When it's cooling out of the oven, slice and enjoy.